All right, Bill, take it away.
All right. Pull up my slide.
All right, here we are.
Great. All right. Well, welcome to another webinar with Dr. Laffer today. And I think this is probably timely with where the economy is, et cetera. So what I wanted to do, first of all, I wanted to give you a little background for those who are new to the webinar on what My Financial Coach does. And it's all based around what the challenges are for both employees and employers. Next slide. So when you take a look at some of the key employees you have within your organization, and this goes for even individuals that work for organization, the problem is that the complexity of employee benefits today, when you have things like deferred comp, long-term incentive plans, insurance, 401ks, other types of retirement strategies, people are just too busy to really fully understand how they get coordinated. In fact, they're not all on the same platform. Many times you have to go to one platform to look at your deferred comp, one to look at your medical insurance and other benefits, one to look at your retirement. So what we hope to do is to consolidate that. So today employees reach out to their quote unquote advisors, people who might be managing money for them or selling insurance. And these people really don't have an in-depth understanding of how all of these corporate benefits work and how people can utilize them in concert with their own personal assets. And they don't have the bandwidth to do it. And quite honestly, the financial incentive to work in an unbiased atmosphere. We at My Financial Coach are unbiased and unconflicted in the sense that our CFPs don't sell any products or services. Next slide. So when you think about total rewards for an individual, you can see the complexity that one has within their own program. They have their core benefits, but they've got, if they're a key employee within a company, they've got a lot of moving parts, and coordinating those and maximizing the benefits is really key. Next slide, please. So data shows up to 80% of companies report their employees do not open or read benefit materials. And again, we don't find that surprising when you take a look at executives or business owners who have a lot of other things to do. In fact, I saw a statistic the other day where 93% of people on re-enrollment for medical insurance just select what they picked the previous year. And that doesn't surprise me either, because they just don't have the time to focus on all of these benefits. And if you think about that for a second, they say, well, it worked last year, I'll take it this year, without going back and looking at their medical history, looking at their utilization, maybe looking at a health savings account, et cetera. Plus, many benefit plans involve complex rules, so people might not fully understand what benefits are being provided. I remember a number of years ago, an HR director at a high-tech company told me that she had a senior executive, engineer, PhD in computer science, let over $1 million of in-the-money stock options lapse. And when she went to him and said, why did you let all of those options in the money lapse? He said, I didn't have the funds in order to exercise those shares. She said, why didn't you think about a cashless exercise? He said, I don't know what that means. So even the most sophisticated people high in the organization really don't have their arms. This is not their day job around these benefits. And finally, there's no one single source where everything is in real time on a platform where you can coordinate your 401k, your deferred comp, your stock programs, all with your personal assets. Next slide. So the challenge for the employer. Next slide. So mid-sized employers don't have cost-effective financial wellness solutions for executives or highly compensated employees. Currently, programs are really too costly. Now, we at My Financial Coach have taken technology along with working with individuals virtually and able to bring those price points down substantially. So this is really a Fortune 500 company benefit that is affordable for mid or small organizations. So we have a lot of physician practices, law firms, and even individuals who are taking advantage of this benefit because it's cost effective. Next slide. So when you take a look at the pandemic and the financial stress and the impact on the bottom line of organizations, studies say that 45% say finances have been a distraction at work. Obviously, that impacts productivity. 72% would be attracted to another company that cares more about their financial well-being than their current employer. Again, that's going to have an impact on retention in an organization. And 57% avoided having medical issues addressed due to the cost. Again, it has an impact on cost. So productivity in itself, you can make your people a lot more productive and get the value out of those employer-sponsored benefits by communicating and educating your key employees and showing them how to use their programs along with their own personal assets. Next slide. So when you think about financial planning, many people say to us initially, hey, I already have a financial planner over at a big brokerage house. And those people do financial planning in the sense where they do planning about 15% of the time, and then they jump into investment management or other solutions like insurance, et cetera. They don't take the time, as you can see on the right side, to hit all of the elements of financial planning. Our CFPs start with cash flow and budgeting and go through all of the aspects of planning. So they get a true financial plan, and then they have the ability to go back on the left side and work with their other advisors. So they have transparency, they have unbiased advice, and unconflicted advice. Next slide. So we've consolidated everything on one single platform. So on your iPhone, iPad, or computer, in a very secured atmosphere, you can look at your entire net worth in real time. And then you can pick up the phone and work virtually with a certified financial planner, not a call center, but your own CFP, who understands your full picture, has everything in front of them as you do, and helps you plan out the year. Look at your goals and objectives. And again, you have the ability to work with your current advisors, or we have a number of subject matter experts who have really brought a lot of value to our clients this year. We have sought out people in legal, investments, insurance, and other strategies to help our people maximize the value of their assets today. And we're going to hear from a couple of our subject matter experts today. Next slide. So there's a little overview of My Financial Coach. I would encourage you to go on the website, go through My Financial Coach University, get a good idea of some of the subject matter experts that we're using, but more importantly, get a good understanding of the process. So it brings us to our main event, as they say in boxing. So let's get ready to rumble, right, Dr. Laffer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if I had to seek out an international authority on everything that's happening in the world today, I would have selected Dr. Arthur Laffer, the father of supply side economics, and his extensive experience working with governments all around the world, and of course, known here in the United States for working with several presidents. We have an unbelievable time in the economy happening to us today. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our director, shareholder at My Financial Coach, and my good friend, Dr. Arthur Laffer.
Thank you very much, Bill. It's a pleasure here. By the way, I've been working with Bill for years and years and years. He still hasn't caught on that I'm really not worth what he says I am, but goodness gracious, I'm pleased. I especially love your introduction, Bill, because it makes me feel a little bit humble, by the way, and the comments, but I only wish my mom and dad were still alive and they could have heard your comments. I mean, you know, my dad would have been so proud and my mom would have actually believed you. It's fun. What I want to do is just go through very quickly with the state of the economy. I want to do it with regard to the last jobs report. As you know, we have a new jobs report coming this Friday, but the last jobs report was very, very impressive. two things happened. One is the jobs report showed a very large increase in the number of jobs. I think it was 471,000 new jobs, which was huge compared to the last 4 or 5 months beforehand. But a lot of that increase was not really just the number of jobs increased, but it was also a change in the seasonal adjustment by the Department of Census. Did it with re-benchmarking the series. So what they did was there was a huge change in the benchmark, which added somewhere between 700 and 750,000 jobs. And then there was also a very large increase in the revised numbers, the new numbers. So it really looked like it was a blowout month on jobs. And I just want to go through that with you a little bit. First place, the benchmark revisions did raise the job growth substantially in the last 6 months, but in the same breath, it was just a seasonal adjustment. It lowered the job growth in the prior 6-month period, coming out about even in there. It was really just a seasonal adjustment revision, which tended to really make the numbers look very, very large. And on the face of it, even 471,000 new jobs is a big, big deal. That big deal was very different from the unrevised series, and the lowering earlier, 6 months earlier, was quite substantial as well. Now, when you look at this, I'd also want to mention that not only did we have a big increase in jobs in the U.S., 471,000, but just for the record, we also had a very sharp drop in average hours worked. So there was a sharp, if you look at the real input into the economy, which I think should be not of the number of people working, but the total number of hours worked into the economy. If you look at that, we have had a decline in total hours worked for the last 6 months, month by month by month by month down. In fact, this last month, the average hours dropped by as much or dropped by a little bit more than the percentage increase in the number of people employed. And the actual numbers of average hours was actually lower. If you look at this number, these numbers are not nearly as positive as the headline number would suggest. I mean, it really isn't. Total hours worked actually fell last month. Now we have this coming up this Friday, so we'll see whether that trend continues, but it has been declining for quite a while, and last month actually was negative. I want to also go through with you inflation numbers because they're extremely important as well. As you know, the CPI went up this last month. The year over year month went up by 7.5%, which is a very large increase. That number has been increasing steadily for the last almost 12 months. It's been increasing. And what you want to know on this number is it is a 12-month moving average. And when you have a 12-month moving average, two things happen when a new month hits. Number one, you get a new month added to the index, which is unknown. But the second thing is you get a month taken off the back end of that index, which we know exactly how large that number is. It was very easy to forecast that the CPI would be rising at 7.5% because the numbers being dropped off in the last several months have been very low numbers, and the numbers coming in, even if modest, would have still raised the year number substantially. Looking forward with knowledge of the monthly numbers that are going to be dropped off, each month adds about 8 1/3% to the total index number. So we have a lot of information as to what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 or 5 months. And while the numbers are a little bit larger that are being dropped off than have been dropped off before, they're still small. And my guess is, knowing how the numbers being dropped off are going to be dropped off, that will tend to raise the rate of inflation, at least measured inflation, over the next 3 or 4 months. If you add to it the knowledge of what's happening in the marketplace and what the new month's inflation numbers just by monthly numbers would be, you get a sense that those numbers are going to be pretty high too. I mean, for example, the producers index, producers price index, is way above the CPI. It's at, I think, 9.7%, where the CPI is at 7.5%. And it's been above the CPI for quite some time. And when you think about producers' prices, they're the stage earlier than consumer prices. So therefore, they sort of flow into consumer prices. And my guess is, because of the positioning of the producer price index and how fast it's been growing, you're going to really get a lot of pressure to raise the CPI as well, just because of the producer's price index historically being much higher than the CPI. Likewise, you see that oil prices are now almost $95, $97 a barrel. That is very high by all standards, and that will be feeding into the indexes as well. That will be adding to it. Rents, which are about a third of the total index, the consumer price index of rents. Those rents have been rising steadily. Two portions of the rents: one, renewal rents, they've been rising, but new rents, new renters, those things have been rising very rapidly, much faster than renewals. So that's also adding to the inflation thing. If you look at it also, spot commodity prices, now they're way below, they've been bopped around, but in the last period of time, there's been a very large spike in spot commodity prices. Also, which my view of the world is that will be adding to the inflation numbers. And lastly, if you look at monetary policy, which has just been, in my mind, disgusting, the Fed has just accommodated any type of inflation number by just expanding the monetary base and the M1 numbers dramatically, which means that there's no way the Fed can hold back inflation through tightness of the monetary policy. Money supply and monetary base have been growing inordinately rapidly. The way we stopped inflation in 1981, taking you back to the Reagan years, when we took office on January 20th, 1981, the prime interest rate in the United States was, I think, 21.5%. Inflation was running at 15, 16%. The way Paul Volcker stopped inflation was by having the real interest rate, the nominal interest rate plus the rate of inflation. All right. The real interest rate was way above the nominal interest rate, which was the Fed interest rate was way above the rate of inflation. And therefore, you had the real interest rate very high, which caused a tightening of the money markets, and it actually brought down inflation. Nothing like that is happening today. If you look at the 10-year bond, the 10-year bonds are yielding today maybe about 1.92%, something like that. If you've got CPI inflation of 7.5%, you've got a negative interest rate there of almost 5.5%. That is not anything you ever want to happen. If you want to control inflation, you want the real interest rate way above positive interest rate, not a negative 5.5%. I just wanted to point those out to you. I have a paper called The Deep Dive. Bill, if anyone in the group would like to get a copy of that deep dive, I'll send a copy to you, Bill, and you can just give it to them if they'd like, where I go through these numbers very, very carefully, and I hope they make some sense to you. The last thing I want to just talk about, instead of just the jobs market and also the inflation, is I want to look at sort of the broader picture of the world. Last time on this webinar, I talked about running Reagan backwards, and I want to go on that a little bit with you as well. Ukraine, I think, has turned out to be a very big disappointment to Putin. I think he was expecting a much easier time, and he's found it a very bad time. I think he thought the place would dissolve. It did not. The response by the world has been very negative, and I think Russia has suffered enormously in the last 5 days. That doesn't mean it's going to stay that way, but it surely looks like a very bad move on the part of Putin's, and the world at large is coalescing and really coming down hard on Putin. And I think Ukraine may be well like Russia and Afghanistan, or like US and Afghanistan, or much like US and Vietnam. Bill, as you know, you served honorably in Vietnam, 68, 69. I was over there. I visited Vietnam in 1970. I was with the White House then. Vietnam was a huge, huge lodestone around the neck of America, as was Afghanistan. And it was Afghanistan for Russia as well. I could go on. But when I look at Ukraine, when I look at Afghanistan for the US today, it reminds me a lot of Iran, the Iran-Contra situation. And what I'm seeing in this world is a very big political swing, where that political swing, I guess 6 months ago, I was really depressed about the politics of America. Today, I'm very uplifted. Not only am I delighted that the Build Back Better did not pass, but also the poll numbers on Biden have been very negative. I think he's been a very bad president. And with this situation in Ukraine and Afghanistan and all the poll numbers, I see a new change coming in the US, much like the world around 1978, 79 with Jimmy Carter and with the Iran hostage crisis and all the economic problems that were coming then. I think you're going to see an election change in 2022 that will be very favorable to the Republicans. I think the Republicans could well possibly, 50-50 chance they'll take the Senate. And I think there's a good chance that they have a big gain in the House. If they have that, I think you're going to see the next 2 years as really a conflict administration versus Congress. And then what you're going to see happening is a victory in 2024. My view is everything in this earth is point, counterpoint, thesis, antithesis. If you look at the concept of tall, you need people like me who are short to make tall make any sense. If you look at slim, you need people like me who are fat to make slim make any sense. All of this world is point and counterpoint. To have bad, you need good. To have God, you need the devil. I asked myself, whoever would Sherlock Holmes had it not been for the evil genius of Professor Moriarty. Moriarty made Holmes the super sleuth he was. And in that same breath, I'm going to tell you from my experience that if Ronald Reagan had won in 1976, you would have not seen the Ronald Reagan that you actually saw. In 1976, Ronald Reagan would have been a very much different president and not nearly as good a president. It took Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan. And if I may say, this is just me talking here, in the same sense that it took Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan, you cannot believe the great president who is going to follow on the heels of Joe Biden. I am extremely optimistic about the long run position of the US. I'm extremely optimistic about the change in economic policies. We have a long way to go to undo the damages done by the government spending, and especially the infrastructure bill, the Build Back Better, the COVID relief bills are just outrageous. But we have a long way to go to undo that, but we have a lot of time to do that. And with the damage done to Russia, with the warning that damage done is the warning to China not to mess with Taiwan, the warning that goes with Cuba and with Venezuela and Iran as well, that I think the US is poised. It'll take 4 or 5 years, but is poised to have one of the greatest periods in US history of expansion. And I'm 81 years old, and I just hope to God, Bill, I live long enough to witness all of this and the next 4 administrations after that. Thanks.
You will.
Thank you, guys.
So Impo's got a number of questions, but one question I had was, we have the State of the Union tomorrow, and on Wednesday you're with Kudlow, Steve Forbes, and others to debrief kind of the State of the Union. What do you anticipate is going to be in that State of the Union?
Well, I would anticipate that President Biden will try to take credit for all the things he can, and credit, and you know the things he said that he's done. A couple of things he has done that he did very well. The medical transparency, he did not reverse President Trump's executive order. In fact, he put it through his own executive order for medical transparency, which I think is just one of the biggest home runs you can imagine. And by the way, I have a long paper on that. If any of your viewers would like that, Bill, I'd be more than happy to share that with them. If you look at Biden, I think he's going to take credit. I believe he'll try to take credit for Ukraine and for what's going on there. I don't think he deserves the credit there, but I think he'll try to do that. I don't know how he's going to handle inflation. He's going to be an inflation denier. I think it's it's the supply chain, it's big businesses, it's going to be all of this stuff. None of that really makes sense in this world, that they have not caused the inflation. But I think he's going to try to say that. And I think it's going to be I don't think he's going to change his positions on anything else. He wants the big Build Back Better, as if more government spending would stop inflation. What he's not done is he's not accepted responsibility for keeping people out of the labor force. The participation rate in the US has dropped dramatically because of all of this welfare spending, because of all of these transfer payments. The people don't need to work, they're not working. And that has really caused the average hours to decline. It's caused the participation rates to decline. And I don't think he's going to take any notice of that. All he's going to talk about is the unemployment rate, which is a non-issue today. The real issue is the supply of hours to the workforce, and that's been declining.
Empo, do we have questions?
All right. Hey, Dr. Laffer, it's good to have you on again.
Thank you, Empo.
I have a few different questions that our audience has shared with us. So going on the same line of the Ukrainian crisis right now, recently over the weekend, the EU has moved to ban Russia from the SWIFT payment system. And now there is a focus on the United States, perhaps following suit. If the West does impose essentially locking Russia out of the SWIFT payment system, do you feel like there would be wider economic impacts around the world as well as the United States?
Yes, very definitely they would be. You know, I'm really not wholly on board with embargoing all these things. Do remember when you do sanctions and embargoes and all of that stuff, it hurts you too. You know, for example, the reason why they've exempted oil from the sanctions policies is because the West is afraid that if they put sanctions on oil, the price of oil will go through the ceiling, and that would hurt us. Well, all sanctions hurt us as well as Russia. And these policies, I think Russia's falling under its own weight. Everything I've heard on the news and everything I've heard in private is that the Russian troops are not up to fighting in Ukraine. They can't handle it. They're losing a lot of major hardware. They have not disrupted the West. The West has become, if anything, more united against Russia, and that Russia is in a desperate, desperate situation. What I worry about is how do we get Putin to stop the war and to pull back? And by keeping on hitting him, I'm not sure that's the right way to do it. I'm scared of him, to be honest with you, and I'm not a military person, but you know, I'm worried about him with nuclear weapons. I'm worried about his irrational reactions. I'm very pleased with the difficulty he has in Ukraine. I know Ukraine fairly well. I've been to Kiev and at the Yalta conferences there, and it's a very strong country, and it's great what it's doing. But I think the Russian military is going to fall under its own weight. Think of how large Russia's GDP is. I don't know what it is in dollar terms, but if ours is something like, I don't know, what, 15 trillion, something like that, Russian GDP has to be 3 or 4 trillion, 2 or 3 trillion, something in that area. Imagine the size of the military operation there and the losses they have, the troops they have there. I mean, it's a massive burden on their economy and on their government. And my view is that, you know, they're just gonna fall under their own weight. From what I've heard from the frontline stuff as reported, is that these soldiers are not well trained, the equipment's not great, and they're just not standing up to the Ukrainian resistance. And, you know, taking over cities and things is a long, long process. And Russia does not have the real resources or the real wherewithal to be able to fight that. And the stock market, I think in Russia this morning was down 35% or 33%. I mean, it's just, they are in a very losing situation. And what I'd like to do is make sure we let them stop and give them all the reasons to stop as quickly as possible. And just make sure they get the hell out of Ukraine right now. The lesson learned in China, Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran, I think, is a big lesson. Those countries now are going to be much more hesitant to try to do expansionism than they were before. And then once you remove Biden and get a pro-growth, non-redistribution aside, I jokingly said that I think Biden's going to appoint Fauci as the new ambassador to Russia and demand a Russia-wide mask mandate to get even with Russia. The other one is the joke, and it's a joke, and maybe a little too early for a joke, but that Biden was wanting to pull military support out of Ukraine when he found out that the bomb shelters didn't have transgender bathrooms. Just joking. But, you know, there are things in this world that are important, and Biden is not focused on any of them. And there are things in this world that are much, much less important. And that's all he's focused on. And I think the change in administration, the change in the politics will be very beneficial to America.
All right, well, Dr. Laffer, we appreciate your time. Do you happen to have time for one or two more questions?
I'm here for you.
All right. So this next question actually is a shift in gear away from the Ukrainian topic, but one of our questions is it possible to cut taxes and have the Fed keep interest rates low while simultaneously increasing revenue and producing economic growth?
I think the last time I went through with you my book, Taxes Have Consequences, and I think I went through it. And what you find, and let me just say it, and I not just focusing on interest rates, but whenever you've cut the top tax rate, all right, whenever you've cut the top tax rates, the rich report a lot more income. They not only earn more income, but they also shelter less income. So they report more income because they shelter less and earn more income. The average tax rate changes very little when you change the top rate. Now, the top rate determines how much you shelter and how much you earn, but the top rate does not determine your average rate. So when you cut tax rates, the rich report a lot more income, they earn a lot more income, and they shelter a lot less income, and they pay a lot more in taxes. That happens every single time. When they raise rates, when they lower rates also, the economy booms. And when they lower rates, what you also see is that unemployment rates drop, number of jobs, man hours increases, and the biggest benefit from lowering rates goes to the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, the lowest incomes. Average wages of the lowest decile go up very nicely during that. Now, the exact opposite occurs when you raise rates. When you raise tax rates on the rich, which is what Biden has been trying, and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and all the wonderful people, AOC and all that group, they want to raise. Whenever you raise rates, the rich earn less, they shelter more, tax revenues go down substantially, and the economy goes into the doldrums, and the really damaged people primarily are the poor and the minorities and disenfranchised. It has happened throughout the 113, from 1913 to the present, which is a 109-year history of the U.S. income tax. It's like clockwork. It just fits. And I think I put those charts on the screen last time, and it's really true. And we can raise revenues by going to a flat tax. You want to lower the highest rates, raise the lowest rates, and make a broad-based flat tax. And if you did that, Empo, we could generate huge amounts of revenues and reduce that ridiculous deficits and that horrible spending that they've done for the last 7 years or 5 years or so. We could do that, and we could create an enormously prosperous country. And frankly, I hope that's where we go. The Fed is not in line with controlling inflation, as you know. I mean, raising the discount rate 0.5%. My God. I mean, 0.5% when you've got inflation running at 7.5% and you've got the interest rate at less than 1%. That's silly. I mean, you know, if you lend money, if you buy government bonds, you're losing 5.5% per annum. That's crazy. Why would anyone ever lend money to the federal government if you're going to lose 5.5% per annum? Well, we need a new Fed. We need a new fiscal policy. We need a new administration. And I really think it's coming. And I'm very excited about it.
All right, well, Dr. Laffer, thank you. We're at the top of the hour. I'd like to thank you and, of course, all of our other participants for sharing their thoughts with us. I'm going to bring Bill on to give his closing thoughts. And for anyone who did not get your questions answered, please continue to send me those, and I will try to get responses to you as soon as possible. And I will let Bill have it.
Good. On Wednesday, is that Fox Business with Kudlow?
Yes, it is. It's 4 o'clock Eastern. I don't know what portion. It's between 4 and 5. And it will be Steve Moore, Steve Forbes, myself, and Larry Kudlow. I don't know how long the segment will be, but it's they're my 3 best friends. So what can I tell you? It should be fun. And we're going to discuss the State of the Union.
Great. Well, thank you for your time again. We look forward to seeing you all on the next quarterly webinar that we'll be doing. And as Empo said, this is recorded, so you're going to be able to go in and revisit it and maybe pass it on to a friend. Thank you, Dr. Laffer.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.